Think for a second. Can the film industry exist without a government? And so today we're going to talk about the tax rebate, aka the tax incentive, which is so important as a basic building block of film funding today. It really shows how films get made and why we're in the situation that we're in today in the film industry. The first thing we're going to go over is what exactly is a tax incentive and how do they work? Each state has their own rules about where the state budget goes. In these states, they can go to any number of things, whether it be the roads or the hospitals or the arts. When you get into the specific budgets, each state has a maximum cap of money that they're allowed to give. And of course, they get to dole those out however they deem fit. Around the 1990s, Louisiana decided that they were going to use part of their arts budget to do something called a tax incentive. Basically, it's a huge discount on your film of up to 20 to 30%, which is massive when you start talking about films that are worth $200, $300 million. They start to really add up, and you can use some of the money that you had saved for the film toward other things like marketing. There are three types of tax incentives. The first is the cash rebate, arguably seen as the most effective, the kind that will put straight cash into your pocket. Dollar bill, yo. The next is the tax incentive, is what we'll mainly be focusing on today. The tax incentive is a fascinating structure that started in a red state of all places. And of course there are grants. And usually for grants, there are some stipulations that you have to fill out to get them. And usually you have to be a resident of that state, which isn't necessarily the case in the other two types of tax incentives. And it took about 10 years to really catch on, but it worked. When Oh Brother, Where Art Thou shot Louisiana for Mississippi, they could have very well used a lot of these tax incentives to save money on their film. And there are two sides of the tax incentive conversation. There's one side that's a pretty good argument that says that we should be using this money toward things that matter more. Hospitals, schools, roads, you name it. There's the other side that says, there are people in our state, in our city, in our county who need these jobs, who dream of these jobs, and we have ample opportunity to give jobs and artwork to a broad swath of the community.
Tom concluded that most film incentive programs, quote, had little to no sustained impact on employment or wage growth.
As the tax incentive started to grow in Louisiana, it spread like wildfire. We saw many states starting to do it, and very soon after, California started getting really offended. Bro, what do you mean you don't want to film? You're going to film in Georgia over me? You're a bro? And so they invented their own tax incentive, and New York has one, Louisiana has one, and of course there's Georgia, which has, I think, the largest tax incentive structure in the country as far as limits go. And with these blockbusters and the rise of VFX, animation, and a bunch of other things, we got to see budgets balloon, really balloon, around the 1990s. So if we're comparing movies like Jaws, Star Wars, and Titanic, Star Wars, adjusted for inflation, costs about $50 million. Today, that would be seen as a Wes Anderson movie. I don't believe that that's possible today, but that goes to show you the economics of film budgets have changed so drastically that we're not even in the same world. For reference, Madame Butterfly. Oh, not Madame Butterfly.
Let's try that again.
Madame Web. Oh, I'm so stupid. The budget for Madame Web is 80 to 100 million. So basically, for 2 Star Wars, you could get 1 Madame Web in theory. That's, of course, not how the economics work. What then happened is something I like to call the spectacle arms race, where VFX and animation studios started gunning for these massive ballooning budgets. I mean, $200, $300 million with the tax incentive really makes it easy for you to buy in. And because the movies were more expensive, so were the marketing. And then we were introduced to a global audience. So there was actually money there, and no other countries at the time had the same access to tax incentives that we did. Of course, that all changed. And when they caught up to us, what happens next is what we like to call the race to the bottom. Inside the race to the bottom, the theory goes that if everybody is competing, it's kind of like a capitalist theory, right? If everyone's competing for the same dollars, but that competition is to reduce the amount that they get to spend, there will be more and more and more reductions in tax incentives as we go on.
And that bidding war is exactly what happened late 90s, really more through the mid to late 2000s, is that not only were states that already had these incentives spending more, the ones that weren't players in this space, created new programs and then upped their investment. It's hard to win that fight, especially when the returns are diminishing.
We all need to join forces and make sure that we keep our signature industry. And just like we're going to do in the World Series, we have to make sure that we stay ahead of New York.
In California, Gavin Newsom decided that he was going to more than double the tax incentive limit.
And this new proposal really aims to course correct in a major way.
The industry here is increasingly on life support, and it needs a pattern interrupt. We need to jolt.
In Georgia, they tried to put a limit on their tax incentive structure, and of course they were lobbied against by nobody then, Captain America, Disney. It was Disney. It's always Disney. When something evil happens, I think Disney first. We'll get into my lifelong feud with Disney. It is very one-sided, but it is very strong. Production companies are doing what's called runaway productions. So basically, there are two ways that a production can save money by going to a different country for their work. They can either pay for the VFX company to make something directly, or they can go themselves to a different country and use their tax incentive to make their film. This is happening more and more recently as we're starting to see films being made all over the world in places that would not have been viable as film locations before. And what this is doing for those countries is doing numbers in tourism. You can check here. Most times, the tax incentive money is pretty evenly handed out. I think as long as you're not disparaging or gross or like essentially porn, you can have the tax incentive. But there have been cases of people changing the way that money is given because of a reaction to a film. A cultural reaction, usually. Robert Rodriguez made this killer movie, literally. See the pun? So one of our most resourceful filmmakers makes a film for $10 million, then submits to the Texas board for his tax revenue deduction, and he gets discriminated against. They say it's because it's violent and it shows Texas in bad light. But however, this clip here from Alex Jones might say different. Hey, pull the clip.
Robert Rodriguez, you need to really think about what you've done. Do you understand that you politically put yourself in the criminal zone, potentially, if violence breaks out from this film? When you had the lead actor who plays Machete get up there and powerfully invoke racial conflict when he said, "This is Machete with a Cinco de Mayo message for Arizona." Well, Arizona's going to get your message. Don't worry.
This isn't the first time, nor the last time, that the state apparatus, whether that be the state or the federal government, has changed the basis of the tax incentive or the grant based on the content made. Just the other day, I was watching a movie called Watermelon Woman.
Is Watermelon Woman her first name, her last name, or is it her whole name? I don't know, but girlfriend has it going on, and I think I've figured out what my project's going to be on. I'm going to make a movie about her.
So most of the funding of this film from a grant called the NEA, and the NEA was so offended by Cheryl Dunye's film that they eventually changed the rules about how the money could be received, and now you have to go under a bit of a review process. They decided that they were going to go and give the money to each project instead of the filmmaker. So now they kind of get a bit of a review before they can decide whether they give you money or not, if it's something that they can be interested or not. And I think that that's, it's fair. It's their money, but I don't think it's more right than the other one. I think it's wronger than the other one. I prefer giving the money to the artists and letting them figure it out because they are worthy as an artist. As tax incentives grow, we have to ask ourselves, who benefits from these tax incentives? And how do we get these jobs, not just the jobs, it's like not just the jobs, it's the films, it's the art, it's the culture. How do we get all that back into America? We're gonna have to put a tariff on tax incentives.
Goods that are subsidized by foreign governments can be seen as anti-competitive and could therefore be eligible for what's known as a countervailing duty, essentially a tariff that's levied when the subsidized good is imported.
There's, of course, alternate ways to make productions. There's like a bell curve where if you're too broke, asking for money is pathetic, and if you're too rich and too established of a filmmaker, asking money is pathetic. But what we see recently is more and more filmmakers relying on their fans to do something more of a crowdfunding model, which, given the current state of affairs, I don't think is a good idea either, to be honest. I think it's terrible. We could do co-productions by films, which inherently reduce risk of spending, of investing, and that's something that they do in a lot of other countries, co-productions. And this helps minimize the risk per each film and helps filmmakers and studios take bigger shots down the field in order to maybe get something original that gets the people going.
I don't even know what that means.
No one knows what it means, but it's provocative.
No, it's not. It's
gets
gross.
the people going.
It's disgusting.
That's enough!
Someone who's doing it in a way that nobody else is doing it is Steven Soderbergh. He is releasing his own films. He's trying to crowdfund. He's been sick of the filmmaking model forever, and he's kind of a iconoclast who does his own thing. I think we can all take a lesson from him. Whatever he's thinking of how to raise money is probably not the worst idea. But this still doesn't highlight the need for a more robust economy. I think the film industry likes to kind of go whole hog into ways of funding, ways of creating, and I think it gets the film industry into a lot of trouble sometimes. We end up in spaces and places where we can't get out of. For example, the 2007 writer strike and this most recent writer strike, and what's happening with the animation industry and the VFX industry, two industries that have traditionally always been shat on by Hollywood. Shat on. I mean, really badly shat on.
Rhythm and Hughes went bankrupt just a couple of days before they won the Academy Award for Best Visual Effects for Life of Pi. And then Bill Westenhofer tried to mention it. There were protests outside the Academy, 400 people or more. He tried to mention it on stage. They played him off the stage.
Finally, I want to thank all the artists who worked on this film for over a year, including Rhythm and Hughes. Sadly, Rhythm and Hughes is suffering severe financial difficulties right now. I urge you all to remember.
A 2012 study estimated that production spending in Britain would fall by about 70% were it not for the subsidies. A weakened pound may have drawn even more American business.
One other thing is that the dollar is very strong, which doesn't help create productions at any kind of discount. If I can save 30% in New York, but everybody's making $30 an hour, whereas I can give people an actual living wage in India. I feel good about myself, get the film done in Mumbai, and save a bunch of money while doing it and using their tax incentive structure. It's really, really, really easier if you got that kind of cash. If you don't, you got to do an independent film like the rest of us. And those have a much hazier monetary system. Much, much hazier. And that brings up the big old question. Are film tax incentives sustainable as an industry, right? Can we keep doing this in America, making films abroad that don't feel like America for an increasingly domestic audience, I guess a shrinking worldwide audience, as they start to realize that they too could have film tax incentives and save so much money, time, and effort by filming domestically and giving their people what they want. We have to ask ourselves, what is it that the American viewer actually does want? And is it 3-hour films of Disney characters in CGI? Like, that's also not live action. That's a whole nother thing. So now here we are at the future of filmmaking. What do we even do? I think we're going to start to see smaller and smaller budgets and smaller blockbuster films as we start to figure out that we can't afford that many more Black Panthers. We're already starting to see a drastic reduction in the amount of money spent on these films, but as our economy goes into this next phase, I think we're going to see a real slashing of ideas and VFX and animation. I think they're all going to take a hit that's going to be immeasurable, immense. And we're going to go back to making stories about like 3 guys in a room. Much like the Mumblecore movement. I think we're going to see something akin to the Mumblecore movement come back.